Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic again, some new stuff from a topic we've covered previously. Let's do it. Seriously, what is, in your opinion, the most disturbing archaeological discovery? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Archaeology student here. Here's what I learned in class. A Pueblo village went through a horrible drought and famine. A dwelling was found with the remains of a family that had died violently and had several cut marks all over their body. They also found a human coprolite, ancient poop. It's common practice to run chemical analysis of coprolites to figure out a person's last meal. It was human flesh. The DNA of the flesh particles matched the DNA of the family. Somebody murdered and ate their family, then pooped in the house. When I was visiting Savannah, I did a kayak tour through Ebenezer Creek. Hundreds of freed slaves followed the Union Army on Sherman's march to the sea. The Union Army was being sporadically shelled in the rear by the Confederates. The Union Army built a bridge over the marshy, alligator-infested Ebenezer Creek and told the freed people at the rear they could cross once his 14,000 troops had crossed first. Deciding that the freed people had become a burden, however, he ordered the bridge to be cut, abandoning 600 to 1,000 freed slaves on the western bank. The freed slaves had only death or re-enslavement behind them. Panicked, they opted for near certain death in the waters. Most of the men, women, and children died attempting to cross. A few made it and then tried to make rafts to help others. Davis had no remorse for his actions and was defended by Sherman. Some amount of bones have been brought up, but mostly the creek remains a watery grave. There's an ancestral Puebloan story passed down by the Navajo of a gambler who came up from the south and enslaved the APs, forcing them to build great cities, where they did not want to live, and perform rituals involving cannibalism. Archaeologists later discovered South American parrot feathers and human bones with stone scrapings, evidence of cannibalism in Chiang Canyon, a civilization that showed signs of early abandonment due to its low amount of burials and trash pits. Vikings' burial sites are pretty disturbing. They were often buried with their wives, slaves, and horses. The way Otzi, the Iceman, died was pretty gruesome too. Also, all of the mass graves of the past plagues. I live in a city where a couple of years ago a mass grave of hundreds of 19th century cholera victims was discovered. We knew they were there somewhere. We've been finding bones in the ground for years. The discovery was still a shock for people who basically live now on this graveyard. I mean, it's bad enough if you were enslaved by someone during the Viking era, but all of a sudden if that guy dies, you're looking around like, uh-oh. That there was an entire civilization living in the Amazon Basin that was destroyed by European diseases without Europeans making contact or becoming aware of it, and the Amazon rainforest is a gigantic, overgrown garden. The Battle of Chiang during the Warring States period in China, where the Qin defeated the Zhao kingdom. It said Qin killed over 450,000 and buried their soldiers alive. That region of China continues to find mass graves from that event to this day. Göbekli Tepe. The sheer magnitude and age of the site are itself mind-boggling. A civilization without writing and apparently lacking proper settlements or agriculture continued to develop this temple complex for thousands of years since 10,000 BCE. Some monoliths might require up to hundreds of people to bring and direct them. How did they pass the meaning of this endless project through generations? And the disturbing part, this huge complex was deliberately buried, and thus well preserved, under hundreds of cubic tons of dirt, around 8,000 BCE. Imagine deliberately burying the Louvre Museum or Vatican. What sort of horrible apprehensions or presentment about the future made them to abandon and inter a work of many generations? The thought gave me goosebumps as I stand there looking at that part uncovered by archaeologists. They mean only 5% of the complex was uncovered yet. I highly recommend visiting the site and Museum of Urfa. If I had ever pursued anthropology beyond the undergraduate level, I had intended to focus on cannibalism for my master's degree and human sacrifice for my PhD. The behaviors appear aberrant to the casual observer, but when you look at it in terms of survival among other reasons, cannibalism is actually a pretty logical decision to make. In terms of cannibalism, I think the most disturbing find is not a find at all, yet. I've been reading up on survival cannibalism in China during the Cultural Revolution, and as archives are opening up for the study of Chinese historians, I've been able to gauge how common cannibalism was during that period. What's shocking is how common it was. Cannibalism also occurred during the 1990s famine in North Korea, and that doesn't surprise me at all. But the breadth of cannibalism and the number of recorded cases in China is far higher than I was expecting. I really just didn't think the records would be there to demonstrate it, but they are. So it's not necessarily an archaeological discovery that had happened, it's the one that's going to happen when future archaeologists open up Chinese grave sites from that period. I'm less disturbed by what had been found and more so what hasn't. I don't remember the exact percentage, don't smite me, but basically all fossilized organisms only make up 1 to 10% of all life that was once on Earth. It's horrifying to think just how many things or creatures were here before us that will forever be lost to time, without any way of possibly knowing anything about them other than the fact we will never know. The classic old adage applies. History is written by the victors, right? So, who knows? Infant sacrifices in ancient Carthage. This is sort of debated because we don't have direct evidence of child sacrifice. There is no big bloody altar labeled "burn babies here." But what we do have is Roman accounts of child sacrifice in Carthage. On its own, this isn't super damning. The Romans accused everyone they didn't like of doing human sacrifices. The part that's disturbing is the remains of infant cremations mixed in with cremated animal remains. This may have just been a Carthaginian burial tradition, an animal sacrifice accompanying a lost child. However, the odd thing is that the infant or animal cremations are found separate from other burials, which suggests that these infant cremations were somehow different. In 2016 or 17, they unearthed something like 900 plus remains of babies who died or were killed by nuns in Tuam, Galway, Ireland. It was the septic tank of an old site where laundry used to be. This is a place you were sent to if your baby out of wedlock or if your family cared too much about how the neighbors thought of them. You washed clothes until you gave birth and your baby went to an orphanage. Wealthy Irish, British, and American couples came to help the poor babies whose mother was well alive and in the laundry. Obviously, sadly, some babies never made it to the orphanage. I always say it. Priests are now known to have done horrific things, but the nuns were worse. They hide things and do things like Tuam. The first king of Hawaii, Kamehameha the Great, united the islands via conquest, and on Oahu, he defeated the main force opposing him by trapping them on a cliff, the Pali, and essentially shoving them off. In the 1960s, when they began building a highway through the mountains, they at one point were doing construction in the area where the battle was fought, and the construction unearthed hundreds of skulls and human remains. To this day, no one camps or hikes in the valley beneath the Pali because of several supernatural incidents many believe are linked to the fact hundreds fell to their death in the valley. Not sure if this counts, but I've recently been watching videos involving metal detecting or digging in the Eastern Front, aka Germany versus Russia. Most of it is just shell casings, old discarded weapons, maybe a wallet with some coins, but one video I found, they found a badge. I forgot the exact name on it, but it was something like Mother of the Third Reich, and it was blue and silver. The award, I believe, was only given to mothers who'd, I think, had 5 or 10 babies. They found this award amongst shells and weaponry in the middle of a forest, a known battlefield. What on earth was it doing there? Was it stolen? Was the wearer working as a nurse, helping in a field hospital when she lost it? Who was she? What happened to her and her children? It's a scary thing to think about. It's not one particular thing, but essentially the millennia of brain drain. We've discovered a lot of instances of things that are exceptionally advanced. Successful brain surgeries, buildings with architecture such that they can sound like birds calling back to you, precision mapping techniques, etc., etc. And these are just the big ones that have made news or viral internet fame. And through mankind's assorted upheavals due to war, famine, jealousy, politics, etc., we've managed to erase the knowledge that was poured into these advances. The most recent iteration of this, of course, is the European colonization and the ongoing mythos around white supremacy, so much so that we have people who actually try to chalk these incredible advances up to aliens. Right, because surely in 100,000 years of our species, Only white Europeans ever made significant strides in technology, medicine, architecture, etc. The same assholes whose doctors protested at washing their hands before operating on patients. We only see a fraction of the past, and there are entire empires and civilizations we can't even begin to learn about because we have mere scraps of what used to exist to them. How far could mankind have gotten, really, if we didn't have to keep warring over resources or destroying one another's civilizations and cultures? What kinds of insane butterfly effects have driven rampant ignorance and death because even one potential inventor, doctor, architect's life was snuffed out? The enormity of human potential never achieved looms large in my mind. I fear the reasons we don't hear anything out there that might be aliens is because the great filter explanation of Fermi's paradox is a constant, that all civilizations are doomed to only dream of their potential before animalistic cruelty, rampant consumption, and war ultimately reduce them to nothing. And there's only so many times civilization can fall before humanity can't rise from the ashes again. Maybe you guys can help me on this one. I know there was some pandemic that where it would appear the person was dead, so they would bury them, but they weren't really dead, and they would found all those claw marks in the graves. Creepy. It's not exactly archaeological, but it's somewhat adjacent. In my hometown area in Massachusetts, there's a man-made reservoir called a Cuban. Several towns were eminent domained and forced to move to create a water supply for Boston. As part of the process, they had to demolish houses and dig up graveyards. More than a few bodies had to be moved into new coffins, and they discovered more than a few people had been mistakenly buried alive. How did they know? They found scratches on the lids of the coffins and lining materials under their nails. The levels of violence in ancient history. I have a friend who is an archaeologist in Latin America and often mentions many of the famous archaeological sites in the region do a lot of work to cover up many of the nastier and more violent discoveries. For example, my friend took me to the archaeological site of Monte Alban in Oaxaca. Many of the carvings and paintings on the temples and buildings around the site feature people with what looks like ornate flowers around their midsection. Most tour guides mention the flowery nature of the carvings and how beautiful they are. In reality, the flowers were the Zapotec people's way of depicting blood, and the scenes are carvings or forced ritual castration.